Let us begin with the good old British economy. Has it really crawled out of the financial crisis? Are UK residents pleased with the latest results?
In 2014, the records showed that nearly a third of British young people in long-term unemployment contemplated suicide, while almost a fourth had self-harmed. According to a YouGov poll for a youth charity's annual Macquarie Youth Index, some 32% of jobless Britons aged between 16 and 25 had thought about taking their own lives, whilst about 24% had self-harmed. Meanwhile, it was found that some 9% of Britain's jobless youngsters believe they have nothing to live for. Although unemployment numbers fell in 2014, the number of people in insecure jobs was on the rise, and many were on wages that didn't pay enough to make ends meet. For the first time, more working households were living in poverty in the UK than non-working ones. In 2012, just over half of the 13 million people in poverty were from working families.
The minimum wage isn't enough. I think, if you are a Londoner in particular, it's much more expensive to live around here. Even shops and food, cigarettes, simple things like that are quite expensive. So, simple means to live and things like that, I think it's quite difficult for people.
I think it's definitely too low, yeah. I think they need to support the people of Britain and by giving them, higher minimum wage so that they can actually feed their families, pay their rent.
Even if you pay them £15, they're still struggling. London is expensive.
According to 2014 statistics, 1 in 5 people in the UK were living in poverty. Cuts to social security and public services were combining with falling incomes and rising costs for basics like food and fuel bills to create a deeply damaging situation in which millions are struggling to get by. Britain's leading charity, Action for Children, warns that British society has re-entered the Victorian-era crisis, with thousands of people calling for help from food and clothes banks. The charity noted that it has seen the biggest number of calls for help since the 1940s, saying the country is once again at risk of witnessing the poorest resorting to street begging and food scrounging. In 2014, growing numbers of Britons were turning to charity-run food banks, yet at the same time, the highest earners in the UK have had the biggest tax cuts of any country in the world. And whilst low-paid workers saw their wages stagnate, the super-rich enjoyed their pay and bonuses spiral up.
This gap between the richest and the poorest has exploded. It's got much, much bigger. So the first reason is that when you have some wealthy people who have a lot more influence over the rules, they make rules that suit them. And so it's a kind of like a self-fulfilling cycle.
Housing benefit to pay the rent, many of them in work, and nearly 3/4 of inner London homes were snapped up by foreign buyers. Unemployment was higher than the national average, while young Londoners tend to be more educated, they were also more likely to be out of work.
It's very symptomatic of the government that's in power at the moment. It's a very kind of neoliberal, neoconservative government who doesn't kind of particularly prioritise the needs of people from lower socioeconomic kind of strata who can't afford these kind of rising costs in the present situation that we're in today.
The government is really trying to push us all out of London. They want only the richest people to be able to live in London.
In the great metropolitan capital of the 6th richest country on earth, 1 in 4 children lived in overcrowded homes, over twice the English average. Of the 20 English local authorities with the highest levels of child poverty, 7 were located in London.
Certainly we have had issues where mums have come who are visibly very undernourished. They come here and are very glad just for a tea and coffee, and they've been feeding their children to ensure that they can get to school. But we do work closely with schools and children's centres, and we know from that they've got children coming in who have not had breakfast, might not have had the previous evening meal, and so they work with us as well.
Whilst austerity measures in Britain continue to hit the poorest families hardest, a wealthy elite saw their incomes spiral upwards, exacerbating income inequality, which grew under successive governments over the last quarter of a century. Today, the 5 richest families in the UK are wealthier than the bottom 20% of the entire population. That's just 5 households with more money than 12.6 million people.
It's very depressing. London has more billionaires than Moscow and New York. And these billionaires have obtained their money, I didn't say made their money, obtained their money largely through political connection. They have not been developing new wealth.
Meanwhile, media revealed a 7-figure cost, reportedly at £4 million, $6.8 million or €5 million, for repairs and refurbishments of a Kensington Palace apartment for Prince William, his wife Catherine, and their baby son Prince George. Prince William received a fly just in time for his 32nd birthday on Saturday the 21st of June. Reports said Queen Elizabeth II has leased an £8 million sterling, $13.6 million, 2008 Augusta A109S Grand helicopter for her grandson, who is second in line to the British throne, and wife Kate Middleton, 32.
We'll now have a quick look at the internal politics. What is happening to the faith of Brits when it comes to the 3 main political parties?
A month of misery is how the staunchly pro-conservative Daily Telegraph described the few last weeks of 2014 for the hapless Cameron. The British Premier warned yet again that Britain could quit membership of the European Union, ostensibly over the EU's lax controls on immigration. Earlier in November, saw a minister resigning from Cameron's coalition government with junior partner the Liberal Democrats. Such is the bad blood between the ruling partners that the resigning minister Norman Baker didn't even give notice of stepping down to his boss, the Home Secretary Theresa May. He just walked off the job, telling media how impossible it was to work with Tory colleagues. Like walking through mud was how he described it. On November the 20th, another by-election triggered after a second Conservative MP announced that he was also quitting the party to join the upstart UKIP. The aptly named former Tory MP, now UKIP MP, Mark Reckless, won the local election by a safe margin. The year ends as UKIP is indeed seen as the biggest threat to the Conservatives, but it believes it now poses as big a challenge to Labour too. Nigel Farage has issued a pre-election warning to Ed Miliband that UKIP is targeting voters in Labour's traditional heartlands. For well over a century, Britain has split along left-right lines, often on the basis of class. Today, the dividing lines are becoming ever more complex, with the political marketplace fragmenting and voting patterns increasingly driven by cultural attitudes. A Comres poll for ITV News suggests that a third of voters in 40 marginal seats would consider voting for UKIP at the next general election. But over half said they would next cast their ballot for the Eurosceptic party. In addition, another Survation poll has put UKIP support at the next general election on 23%, a mere 7 points behind the Conservatives, and just 11 behind the Labour Party.
UKIP are indicating that they could get many more seats in the general election than they're expected to get. The indications are they could win 100 or 200 seats, and that's an awful lot. And that would mean that the Conservative Party would lose 200 seats. The right wing of the Conservative Party would probably have been nudging David Cameron to make the Euro referendum commitment.
But 2014 was not all good for UKIP. UKIP's group in the European Parliament collapsed after the departure of Latvian MEP Iveta Grigul, which left it bereft of the minimum 7 countries needed to qualify as an official parliamentary grouping. However, This was not even a slight remedy for Cameron's headache when it comes to EU-UK bilateral relations in 2014. At the end of October, at the EU Leaders Summit in Brussels, David Cameron took many observers by surprise when he suddenly announced that Britain would not be paying extra budgetary contributions to the 28-member bloc, estimated at £1.7 billion or 2.1 billion euros.
This is completely unacceptable. It is an unacceptable way for this organisation to work, to suddenly present a bill like this for such a vast sum of money with so little time to pay it, and it's an unacceptable way to treat one of the biggest contributors to the European Union.
The revised upward figure for Britain's budgetary contribution came about because EU bureaucrats recently recalculated that London had been underpaying its stipend since 1995. Later, it was revealed that Britain has quietly worked out a deal with Brussels to pay off its £1.7 billion budget arrears in instalments, and thereby avoid incurring additional punitive interest payments of £70 million a month.
What's he going to do? What is he going to do? These are the rules. The contributions to the European Union is a very complex formula, and part of it is a measurement of your GDP against everybody else's. There's nothing he can do.
Meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel warned the British leader that if he goes ahead with ad hoc proposals to curb the influx of immigrants from other EU countries into Britain, then that would spell the end of Britain's membership with the bloc. Merkel reminded Cameron that the free movement of EU citizens among member states is a cornerstone principle of the bloc, and that no state is entitled to impose unilateral restrictions on such movement.